Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey through the corridors of time. You are here with me, the sleepy historian, and together we wander through the stories of the past, not in haste, not in excitement, but in the calm rhythm of soft-spoken history. This channel is called Boring History for Sleep, and if you have found yourself here tonight, it is likely because you are searching for gentle storytelling, the kind of narration that is slow enough, quiet enough, and steady enough to help you drift into rest. If this sort of bedtime relaxation and soft storytelling helps you find peace, you are welcome to support the channel. You might choose to like this video, but only if it truly brings you calm. You might subscribe, but only if you want more soft-spoken history documentaries, designed not to thrill you awake, but to help you gently fall asleep to history itself. And if you feel inclined, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It is strangely comforting to imagine listeners across the world, lying in bed, dimming the lights, and letting these quiet voices from the past accompany them into slumber. Fans of Roman history, medieval archaeology, or the golden ages of distant lands may find a home here, within this calm narration. So, let the worries of the present moment ease away. Imagine yourself not in the noise of modern life, but in the timeless rhythm of distant centuries. Imagine yourself listening as if by candlelight, the quiet scratch of a quill nearby, parchment curling slightly at the edges, and the scent of ink mixing with the faint smoke of an oil lamp. This is calm bedtime storytelling. This is a history sleep story. This is not meant to stir the heart into restlessness, but to soothe it, as if each word were a blanket being carefully folded around you. Tonight, we enter the world of the Abbasid Golden Age. It was a time often described as brilliant, shimmering with discovery and knowledge. Yet, as always, we will move through the story slowly, gently, as though each detail were a page being turned in a very old manuscript. We will not rush. Instead, we will pause often to notice the texture of daily life, the subtle shadows of history, and the quiet persistence of human curiosity. Across 4 long segments, we will move step by step. First, you will imagine yourself living within the Abbasid world, moving to the rhythm of ordinary days in bustling cities and quiet courtyards. Then we will trace the story of a particular life, an event, a figure whose presence shaped the atmosphere of their age. From there, we will explore mystery, archaeology, and culture, the discoveries, the inventions, the fragile manuscripts that carried thought from one mind to another. Finally, we will rest with the contrasts, peering into the lives of the privileged and the powerful, before returning with calm steps to the soft realities of common people. So dim the lights. Let the past whisper softly at the edges of your awareness. Let your mind drift with the rhythm of the story. And if sleep finds you before the tale concludes, that is perfectly fine. After all, here in this quiet place, the past is patient. The stories will always wait for you to return. And now, with a slow breath, let's begin our journey into the Abbasid Golden Age. Imagine yourself awakening in the Abbasid world, sometime around the 9th century. The city of Baghdad, still young by the standards of history, stretches out like a carefully designed jewel on the banks of the Tigris River. The first light of dawn does not arrive with sudden brightness, but with a slow swelling of soft gold across the river's surface. The mists rise faintly, carrying the cool scent of water mixed with earth, and the occasional drift of smoke from cook fires kindled by early risers. The Abbasid capital, founded not long before, was constructed with an air of deliberate design. The city was imagined almost like a cosmic diagram, a circle with radiating roads. At its heart, the Caliphate palace and mosque, and beyond it, the great markets, residential quarters, and gardens. To step outside one's home in the early morning meant entering a world alive with scents, sounds, and textures, each one layered into the rhythm of daily life. The cobbled streets are narrow, shaded by buildings leaning toward one another. upper stories projecting just far enough to cast cool shadows on those walking below. You hear the clip of donkeys' hooves, the low murmur of voices, and the faint clinking of bronze vessels being set out by vendors preparing for the day. Some shops open early. Bakers with flatbreads fresh from clay ovens, their crusts carrying the earthy warmth of flour and fire. Water sellers with tall jars balanced against their hips, calling out softly to passers-by. Spice merchants arranging small pyramids of saffron, cumin, cinnamon, each one lending a fragment of fragrance to the air. Life here was not luxurious for most, but it was layered and intricate. Ordinary men and women balanced between the needs of family, the obligations of faith, and the demands of work. Picture a craftsman at his bench, carving delicate designs into wood, the rasping sound of his tool measured and steady. Imagine a weaver seated before a loom, the gentle clack of threads interlacing into a patterned cloth, or the quiet persistence of scribes, bent over parchment, guiding ink into careful shapes of letters, each one intended to carry meaning far beyond the room in which it was written. For those who lived in the Abbasid world, religion marked the day as much as the sun itself. At dawn, a gentle call to prayer threaded through the city streets, reminding every household of its place within a wider rhythm. Yet the prayer did not erase the worldly needs of people. Afterward, markets grew louder, workshops busier, children's voices more insistent. Families gathered to eat humble breakfasts, bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps a taste of dates, or lentils seasoned with a pinch of spice of fortune allowed. Education and learning were not the privilege of the elite alone, though access was uneven. In Baghdad especially, knowledge was esteemed, and those who could afford to do so sent their sons, and sometimes daughters, into the care of tutors or study circles. The sound of recitation carried across courtyards, verses from the Quran, lines of poetry, mathematical formulas spoken aloud, so that memory might be strengthened by repetition. Libraries, though still few in number, were revered, and books were valued with a devotion almost equal to that reserved for precious metals. But alongside the pursuit of knowledge, life remained filled with its ordinary labors. In the narrow alleys, potters set out vessels to dry in the sun, their surfaces chalky before firing. Carpenters leaned planks against their workshops, shaping wood for beams and furniture. Women moved with quiet persistence through courtyards, tending gardens, preparing food, or guiding children to the small but important tasks of the day. A city of hundreds of thousands required ceaseless movement. Grain arriving by boat, textiles carried on camelback, fruit brought from surrounding orchards. At midday, the air thickened with heat. The streets grew quieter, shutters drawn against the glare. Shade became a precious refuge, and many retreated indoors, the coolness of stone walls or mud brick offering some relief. Life slowed to a rhythm of patience. Quiet conversation, a shared meal, perhaps rest. For those wealthy enough, gardens offered another form of escape, where fountains trickled softly, water playing against carved stone channels, and citrus trees gave off a clean fragrance in the dry air. As the sun declined, activity returned. Evening markets buzzed with chatter. Storytellers recited tales of far-off lands, and musicians played soft melodies on oud and flute. Children, released from study and chores, darted through the streets in games that echoed the laughter of centuries. Meals became more generous if fortune permitted. Stews with lamb and chickpeas, rice scented with herbs, sweets of honey and nuts. And as the stars rose above Baghdad, life continued, but with a gentler pace. Oil lamps flickered behind lattice windows, casting patterned light onto stone. Families gathered in shaded courtyards, sharing conversation and stories. Some would drift into discussions of philosophy or trade. Others simply rested, the day's labor behind them. The soundscape of night was softer. The occasional bark of a dog, the distant call of a night watchman, the ripple of river water against its banks. The rhythm of Abbasid daily life was not uniform, yet its pattern repeated in quiet variations. day after day, a constant movement between light and shadow, between prayer and labor, between the narrow alleys of the poor and the wide courtyards of the well-to-do. And within that rhythm lay the hum of a civilization, one that, though centuries passed, still whispers to us through its manuscripts, its ruins, and the very memory of its name. To linger longer in the Abbasid world is to discover the quiet complexity hidden beneath its outward appearances. Life was not only about markets and streets, but about the domestic spaces, the courtyards and rooftops, the hidden rhythms of households where countless stories unfolded. Imagine stepping into one such home, modest yet comfortable, in the heart of Baghdad. The doorway is unassuming, opening onto a shaded corridor that leads into a central courtyard. The courtyard is the living heart of the house. Sunlight filtered through awnings, the sound of water dripping from a clay jar, the scent of herbs growing in clay pots. Around it, rooms are arranged, a space for family to gather, an area for cooking, a place where guests might be received. Roofs are flat and accessible. In summer, families often sleep beneath the open sky, finding cool relief in the heat of the day. In these spaces, the daily life of women was particularly significant, though often unseen by outsiders. Women oversaw the preparation of food, the weaving of cloth, the care of children. Some, within wealthier households, also oversaw servants, managed accounts, or directed estates. In quieter moments, they engaged in embroidery, storytelling, and even poetry, expressions of creativity that rarely left the home but shaped the inner culture of the family. The rhythm of a woman's day, like that of men, balanced between labor and devotion, between the necessities of survival and the subtle pleasures of craft. Meals, though seemingly simple, were deeply layered in flavor and tradition. Bread remained a constant companion of every table, flat, round, and slightly charred from clay ovens. Stews blended grains with meat, legumes with vegetables, all seasoned with the spices that flowed through Baghdad's markets. Vinegar, garlic, mint, and coriander flavored common dishes, while those with greater wealth enjoyed rice imported from distant lands, sweetmeats rich with honey, and drinks infused with rosewater. A meal was not merely nourishment. It was a reflection of trade, geography, and the circulation of ideas across vast distances. Beyond the home, education shaped the broader pattern of daily existence. In study circles, students gathered around teachers seated on mats or low cushions. Instruction was oral, relying on repetition and memorization. One could imagine the slow rhythm of recitation, the cadence of Quranic verses, the careful parsing of grammar, the patient unfolding of mathematical problems. Learning was less about speed and more about depth, less about individual assertion and more about continuity with tradition. The written word was revered in books, hand-copied, laboriously illuminated, bound in leather, were treasures of extraordinary value. Even those who could not read directly felt the weight of this culture and knowledge, for stories and wisdom flowed through recitation, poetry, and public discourse. Religion continued to shape the hours of each day. At noon, the second call to prayer echoed across rooftops, weaving together the voices of countless muezzins into a chorus that settled over the city like a soft veil. Work paused. Conversations shifted. The rhythm of life realigned itself briefly to devotion. On Fridays, mosques swelled with congregants, their columns casting long shadows across marble floors, their courtyards filled with the hum of voices in anticipation of the sermon. Yet religion was not a separation from daily life. It was its framework, woven seamlessly into every moment. Leisure, too, found a place within Abbasid rhythms. Poetry was not confined to scholars. It was recited in homes, sung in markets, exchanged among friends. Tales of love, adventure, and moral reflection floated through evenings. Music accompanied gatherings, sometimes simple, sometimes elaborate with lutes, flutes, and percussion blending into melodies that encouraged conversation rather than silenced it. Board games like chess offered entertainment, sharpening wit while passing the hours. And for many, the most common leisure was simply conversation, long meandering exchanges that carried from dusk into night. Children, for their part, wove mischief and laughter into this otherwise steady rhythm. They ran through alleys with sticks and balls, played at imitation of merchants or scholars, and sometimes assisted with family work. Their world was smaller, yet within its limits lay endless curiosity. The fascination of a pebble, the thrill of climbing a low wall, the comfort of a parent's voice guiding them back inside as night drew on. Trade gave Baghdad its wider pulse. The Tigris River brought boats laden with goods from distant regions, timber, textiles, glass, and spices. Caravan routes linked the city to Syria, Persia, India, and beyond. Markets reflected this vast network. Chinese porcelain gleamed beside Persian silks. Indian spices nestled among local grains, and African ivory was carved into intricate works of art. To stroll through these markets was to encounter a miniature of the known world, distilled into tangible forms. But daily life was not only about abundance. There were challenges that pressed against every family. Disease sometimes swept through crowded quarters, carried silently along river and road. Floods could rise from the Tigris, unsettling homes near its banks. Shortages of grain struck in years of poor harvest, and the poor bore the brunt of hunger more heavily than the wealthy. Life was a balance between plenty and scarcity, a rhythm of comfort and hardship, each woven seamlessly into the tapestry of the city. As twilight returned, the city once again shifted its pace. Oil lamps flickered in doorways, casting a warm amber glow. Families gathered in courtyards, listening to traveling storytellers who brought news and legend, truth and embellishment interwoven. Some drifted into discussions of philosophy. Others simply exchanged the day's events. And slowly, as darkness deepened, the sound softened once more, an ebbing tide of voices, leaving behind the quiet murmur of river water and the faint hum of night insects. In the steady alternation of labor and rest, worship and conversation, survival and subtle pleasure, the Abbasid world found its rhythm. It was a rhythm both ordinary and extraordinary, filled with small tasks that sustained great civilizations. And as you imagine yourself within that world, you may feel how the cadence of their lives echoes, faintly but persistently, into our own. When we linger even longer within the Abbasid world, daily life opens further into its subtleties. The overlooked spaces, the quiet crafts, the small, enduring details that made the great city of Baghdad and its surrounding regions more than just monuments and palaces. The Abbasid Golden Age is often remembered for libraries, scholars, and innovations, yet the foundation of it all was the calm persistence of countless individuals who lived through ordinary rhythms, unseen but essential. Consider the rhythms of work along the river banks of the Tigris. Early each morning, barges and small boats nudged into harbors, bringing grain from fertile fields, bricks for building, and reeds cut from wetlands upriver. The air was thick with the scent of water and mud, mingled with the sharper odor of fish drying in the sun. Men carried heavy sacks across wooden planks, their movement slow but steady, while others mended nets or patched boats with tar. These riverside scenes provided the invisible lifeline of the city, ensuring food, materials, and fuel arrived day after day. Farther inland, the workshops of artisans hummed with quiet productivity. Glass blowers heated furnaces until they glowed, drawing molten streams into delicate vessels, some clear, others tinted faintly blue or green. Metal workers hammered copper into bowls, brass into lamps, silver into intricate inlays that decorated trays or astrolabes. The clang of hammers was softened by layers of cloth and straw that lined the walls, yet still carried into the air a background rhythm of craftsmanship. Each artisan's handprint, though rarely signed, left its legacy in the objects that traveled far from Baghdad into distant lands. In residential quarters, laundry fluttered from rooftops, catching the wind in patches of linen and wool. Children carried jars of water from public fountains, balanced carefully against their hips. The cries of sellers drifted through alleys, bread fresh in the oven, sesame cakes still warm, figs sweetened by the sun. For every noble who walked in a shaded garden, there were thousands whose lives turned on these quieter labors. Steady, unremarkable, but essential. Healthcare, too, shaped daily experience. In Baghdad, hospitals known as Bimaristans provided treatment for the sick, training for physicians, and refuge for those suffering from chronic conditions. Imagine walking into one of these institutions. The air scented faintly with herbs and resins, water trickling through channels to provide coolness, patients lying on low beds, while attendants administered remedies drawn from a blend of Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions. Physicians moved with deliberate calm, consulting texts or taking notes on wax tablets. For those who could not afford private treatment, these hospitals were a lifeline, embodying the Abbasid commitment to learning applied to human care. But medicine could not prevent every hardship. Epidemics, sometimes swept through crowded neighborhoods, carried invisibly by water or trade. In such times, fear mingled with patience, prayers murmured with urgency, and daily rhythms strained under the weight of uncertainty. Life did not halt, but it slowed, adjusted, adapted, much as it always had, in every civilization touched by both prosperity and fragility. Religious festivals offered a contrast to hardship. On such occasions, the streets filled with processions, lanterns were strung across courtyards, and communal meals were shared. Children watched eagerly as sweet vendors shaped confections, while poets recited verses in honor of faith and tradition. These moments, though temporary, bound communities together, softening the weight of daily struggle with shared joy. The lives of travelers also intersected with the city's fabric. Baghdad, seated at the crossroads of empires, welcomed merchants, scholars, and pilgrims. Imagine the caravanserais, large and surrounding courtyards, where travelers from distant lands rested with their camels and goods. Within those walls, languages mingled: Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, even Chinese. The smell of unfamiliar spices drifted from packs. Silks shone with colors not yet seen in local markets, and stories of distant kingdoms filled the air. These encounters broadened the imagination of locals, connecting their daily lives to the farthest reaches of the known world. Nightfall brought yet another transformation. On rooftops, families spread mats and looked upward, the stars clear and brilliant above the darkened city. Astronomers, working quietly in observatories, measured the heavens with astrolabes, charting positions of planets and stars. To most, the sky was simply a source of wonder, but to a few, it was a text to be studied, an endless scroll of divine geometry. The heavens above Baghdad, reflected in the stillness of the Tigris, gave nightly reminders of order, mystery, and the vastness of existence. And through it all, the soundscape persisted. Donkeys brayed, dogs barked at shadows, the soft shuffle of sandals echoed in corridors. Somewhere, a mother sang a lullaby to her child, her voice carrying through open windows. A scribe sharpened his reed pen, its point tested on scrap parchment. A lamp guttered briefly before being steadied with a drop of oil. These small fragments, stitched together, created the unhurried rhythm of life, ordinary, yet profound in its continuity. To immerse oneself in Abbasid daily life is not to encounter a single grand narrative, but a mosaic of small acts. The potter shaping clay, the fisherman casting a net, the poet murmuring lines into the evening air. It is this mosaic, repeated day after day, that sustained the Abbasid Golden Age, giving it the quiet foundation upon which scholars, rulers, and visionaries built their world. Without these unseen labors, the glittering stories of discovery would have been impossible. And so, as you imagine yourself within this world, perhaps reclining on a rooftop mat, the night air carrying faint scents of spice and smoke, you can feel the rhythm of their lives echo gently in your own breathing. Ordinary, steady, repeating, a rhythm both distant and familiar, soothing in its constancy. To step more closely into the Abbasid Golden Age is to meet the figures whose lives shaped its course. Among these, one name shines quietly but persistently. Caliph Haman, a ruler whose reign in the early 9th century is often remembered for nurturing the pursuit of knowledge. Yet his life was more than that of a patron. It was woven with political struggle, personal choice, and the weight of a vast empire. Imagine Al-Mamun in his youth, long before he became caliph. Born in Baghdad in the year 786, he was the son of the powerful Caliph Harun al-Rashid, whose reign later came to symbolize the wealth and grandeur of the Abbasid dynasty. But though Al-Mamun grew up in proximity to power, he was not the sole heir. His father divided succession between two sons, Al-Amin, his brother, and himself. This decision, intended to preserve unity, instead planted the seeds of discord that would later consume the family and the empire. As a young man, Al-Mamun was drawn to the world of learning. Tutors instructed him in poetry, theology, philosophy, and the sciences. He listened to discussions about Greek philosophy translated into Arabic, about law debated among jurists, about astronomy measured in carefully crafted tables. His temperament leaned toward reflection, his mind open to questions of reason and inquiry. But history rarely allows its rulers to live only in study. When Harun al-Rashid died, Al-Mamun's brother Al-Amin assumed power, and the two soon found themselves entangled in rivalry. The conflict escalated into a civil war that lasted several years. Baghdad itself became a battlefield, its walls echoing with the struggles of soldiers loyal to different heirs. For ordinary citizens, it was a time of fear and uncertainty. Food supplies dwindled, streets were unsafe, and the very heart of the empire seemed to fracture. When Al-Mamun eventually triumphed, after the death of his brother in 813, he did not inherit a world of calm prosperity, but an empire wounded by division. And yet, out of this turbulence, Al-Mamun began to shape a legacy not only of political authority, but of intellectual generosity. He recognized that power alone could not hold the empire together. Ideas, learning, and culture would provide a stronger bond. To that end, he expanded upon his father's traditions, nurturing scholars, funding translations, and supporting the great institution that would become a symbol of his reign, the Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom. The House of Wisdom was not a single library or hall, but rather a network of scholars, scribes, and translators working under state patronage. Imagine the atmosphere within its walls. Long tables covered with manuscripts in Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit. Scribes bent over parchment, copying line after line with careful strokes. Translators debated passages, testing meanings across languages, while mathematicians worked nearby, charting numbers and equations. The sound of scratching reeds on parchment filled the air, punctuated by quiet discussions in many tongues. Al-Mamun's reign coincided with the Great Translation movement, which brought ancient Greek texts into Arabic. Works of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and Ptolemy were not only translated but expanded upon, debated, and challenged. The Caliph himself is said to have engaged directly with scholars, questioning them, supporting their inquiries, and encouraging open discussion. Though rulers are often remembered for palaces and wars, Al-Mamun's curiosity left its mark in ideas that survived centuries. Astronomy fascinated him in particular. He ordered observations of the heavens, supporting construction of observatories in Baghdad and Damascus. Scholars measure the length of a degree of latitude on the Earth's surface, attempting to refine knowledge of the planet's size. In a time when much of the world still viewed the heavens with a mix of awe and superstition, Al-Mamun's court treated the stars as a field of careful study. blending reverence with calculation. Of course, his reign was not only about learning. Political challenges persisted. Revolts flared in distant provinces. Rival claimants tested his authority. Religious debates divided scholars and theologians. Yet, through it all, Al-Ma'mun maintained his patronage of learning. For him, knowledge was not separate from power. It was part of the framework that made authority meaningful, part of the heritage he hoped to leave behind. To imagine Al-Ma'mun is not only to see a ruler seated on a throne, but to picture him walking through a hall filled with manuscripts, pause and ask a translator about a passage from Aristotle, or listening to an astronomer describe the movement of planets. His legacy is found not only in political records, but in the enduring manuscripts that survived his time. The rhythm of his life, like that of his empire, was a balance of turmoil and contemplation, struggle and quiet inquiry. In this way, the biography of Al-Ma'mun is more than the story of a caliph. It is a glimpse into how individuals can shape the direction of entire civilizations, not only through battles won or palaces built, but through ideas encouraged, questions asked, and knowledge preserved. His life reflects the Abbasid Golden Age itself. Turbulent in politics, luminous in scholarship, fragile yet enduring. To understand Al-Ma'mun's place in history, one must picture him not only as a figure of scholarship, but as a ruler navigating the many contradictions of his time. His reign was both fragile and bold, troubled by unrest yet illuminated by inquiry. This duality, tension and learning side by side, was the rhythm of his rule. Imagine Al-Ma'mun seated in his audience chamber, a hall designed not only for grandeur but for conversation. Courtiers and officials stood at respectful distance, while scholars were invited closer, permitted to debate and question. The caliph's robes were not ostentatious compared to those of earlier rulers. He was said to favor simplicity, even austerity, a reflection perhaps of his intellectual temperament. In place of jewels, the wealth of his court was often measured in manuscripts, instruments, and minds devoted to learning. He encouraged translations from Greek and Persian, not simply as a curiosity, but as a deliberate project to enrich his empire. The house of wisdom under his patronage expanded beyond Baghdad, with branches of learning supported in other cities. Scribes multiplied texts, making copies for circulation among scholars, while translators developed a specialized vocabulary in Arabic to express concepts from foreign works. Imagine the quiet labor of these men. Candles flickering low, parchment stretching across tables, margins filled with notes and corrections. Each page copied was an act of preservation. Each word carried knowledge across time. But Al-Ma'mun's curiosity did not rest solely on preserving the past. He sought to test and extend knowledge. Astronomers in his service refined measurements of celestial bodies, drawing star maps that blended precision with artistry. Mathematicians worked on problems of algebra and geometry, laying foundations that would influence later centuries. Physicians dissected the mysteries of the human body not with violence, but with observation, gathering remedies from Greek, Indian, and local traditions. Perhaps most ambitious was Al-Ma'mun's interest in the dimensions of the earth. He ordered scholars to measure a degree of latitude by pacing the desert, calculating the size of the globe with remarkable accuracy for the age. The image is almost dreamlike. Scholars and assistants trudging patiently across the barren landscape, their footsteps slow and deliberate, instruments held carefully, notes recorded on parchment. The desert wind carried dust across their sandals. The sun beat steadily overhead. And yet their purpose was not conquest or trade, but the pursuit of knowledge. Yet Al-Ma'mun's reign was not without controversy. His deep engagement with theology led him to embrace the rationalist school known as the Mu'tazila. This movement emphasized reason in matters of faith, insisting that the Quran was a created text rather than eternal, a view that placed it in contrast with more traditional perspectives. Al-Ma'mun sought to impose his doctrine through the Mina, or Inquisition, compelling scholars and judges to affirm this belief. The Mina remains one of the more debated aspects of his rule. To some, it showed his commitment to intellectual rigor. To others, it revealed an overreach of authority into religious matters. For the scholars summoned and questioned, it was a time of unease. Imagine a juror standing in the caliph's court, asked to declare his belief in the createdness of the Quran. The hall is quiet, all eyes fixed upon him. A word of affirmation secures safety, but resistance risks punishment. Many complied reluctantly. Others resisted with calm defiance, their refusal recorded in history. This episode reveals the complexity of Al-Mamun, a patron of knowledge, yet one who sought to direct it. A supporter of reason, yet also an enforcer of doctrine. His intellectual openness coexisted with a desire for unity, and in trying to hold the empire together, he placed heavy burdens upon its scholars. Beyond Baghdad, Al-Mamun's rule extended into vast provinces: Persia, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, and parts of Central Asia. Each region brought its own traditions, its own tensions, and its own contributions to culture. Governors struggled with rebellion. Armies marched to quell unrest. Yet through it all, scholars continued to gather in libraries and observatories. It was as if the empire contained two currents, one of politics, often turbulent, and one of learning, flowing steadily beneath. To picture his era is to imagine both scenes at once. In one quarter of the empire, soldiers advancing through dusty roads to suppress a revolt. In another, scholars gathered in calm debate over Aristotle's philosophy or Euclid's geometry. Al-Mamun himself stood at the crossing of these currents, seeking to balance the demands of rule with the quieter ambitions of inquiry. The caliph's patronage extended even to the arts of geography and cartography. Maps of the known world were drawn and redrawn, not only as practical tools for administration, but as reflections of curiosity about creation itself. In these maps, the outlines of continents appear imperfect yet recognizable, rivers drawn in curling lines, mountains marked with simple symbols. To trace these lines of the eye is to glimpse how the Abbasid world imagined the shape of the earth they inhabited. Though his reign ended in 833, during a campaign in distant Byzantium, Al-Mamun's legacy endured. The institutions he supported, the translations he encouraged, the debates he initiated, all became part of the great fabric of the Abbasid Golden Age. His successors inherited both the controversies he left behind and the libraries he enriched. Scholars in centuries to come still open manuscripts first copied under his rule, finding them voices from Greece, Persia, and India carried faithfully into Arabic script. In the calm light of reflection, Al-Mamun emerges not as a flawless hero, but as a ruler shaped by contradiction. His reign was turbulent, yet it nurtured ideas that outlived empires. His policies stirred unrest, yet his patronage preserved knowledge that still whispers to us across 1,000 years. To imagine his world is to see both shadows and light, interwoven into the slow, steady rhythm of history. As Al-Mamun's reign entered its later years, the rhythm of his rule settled into a curious balance. The ceaseless demands of governance on one hand, and the enduring pursuit of knowledge on the other. His legacy, which was already taking shape during his lifetime, became ever more intertwined with the institutions he built and the minds he nurtured. Imagine the city of Baghdad during these years, its population swelling with merchants, scholars, artisans, and travelers. The streets were filled with the calls of vendors selling spices, cloth, and parchment. Narrow alleyways opened into larger markets, while the great palace complex stood as a reminder of authority. Yet behind the palace walls, the caliph's interests leaned continually toward scholarship and dialogue. Couriers arrived with books from distant lands, and emissaries returned from Byzantine territories, carrying manuscripts rescued from libraries in Anatolia. The House of Wisdom remained at the heart of this enterprise. It was more than a library. It was a community of minds supported by Al-Mamun's patronage and by the resources of the empire. Translation continued at a remarkable pace. Works of mathematics and astronomy from Greece and India were rendered into Arabic with such care that, for many centuries, Arabic versions would become the standard reference in Europe. Scholars debated not only the meaning of texts, but the methods of inquiry themselves. Was knowledge best gained through tradition, or through reason, or through careful observation of the world? Under Al-Mamun, these questions were not only asked, they were encouraged. One of the most striking examples of his curiosity was his fascination with the heavens. Accounts tell of his interest in observing the stars directly, and of his decision to establish observatories near Baghdad and in the city of Damascus. Picture such an observatory, a simple but purposeful structure, open to the night sky. Scholars sat with their instruments, astrolabes, quadrants, and calibrated sighting tools, carefully measuring the movements of stars and planets. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the scratch of a stylus on parchment as an assistant recorded measurements. Slowly, patiently, the scholars sought to map the rhythms of the cosmos. Equally ambitious was Al-Mamun's commission of new maps of the known world. The geographers of his time were asked to redraw the inhabited lands, rely on earlier works, yet correcting them with fresh information. They divided the earth into regions, described climates, and noted cities, rivers, and mountains. The result was not simply a practical record for administration, but also a statement of curiosity, a desire to imagine the world whole. These maps were decorative as well as useful, their lines flowing across parchment in shapes both recognizable and strange. Yet for all this intellectual vibrancy, Al-Mamun's political life remained demanding. His empire faced unrest at its edges, rebellions in Khorasan, tribal disputes in Arabia, challenges in Egypt and the Levant. To govern such a vast territory required constant attention. He traveled widely, seeking to maintain loyalty among the provinces. Wherever he went, scholars traveled with him, often continuing their studies in the very camps of his armies. Imagine the unusual sight of tents pitched in a dry plain, soldiers practicing drills in one corner, while in another, scholars hunched over manuscripts, protected by nothing more than canvas walls. Knowledge and conflict coexisted side by side. In his final years, Al-Mamun's attention turned increasingly to Byzantium, the empire to the west. The Abbasids had long contended with the Byzantines along the borderlands of Anatolia, and Al-Mamun launched campaigns in the region, both as demonstrations of power and as attempts to expand influence. Yet even here his interest in knowledge persisted. Byzantine libraries held treasures of Greek philosophy and science, and his emissaries often secured such works as part of negotiations or as spoils of war. It was during one of these campaigns, in the year 833, that Al-Mamun's life came to an end. He died near Tarsus, far from the familiar halls of Baghdad, while preparing for another advance into Byzantine territory. The news of his death spread slowly across the empire, carried by couriers over desert and mountain. In Baghdad, the House of Wisdom remained, its rooms filled with scholars who had been shaped by his vision. His brother Al-Mu'tasim succeeded him, inheriting not only the burdens of governance, but also the cultural momentum Al-Mamun had set in motion. The caliph's death did not halt the intellectual current he had nurtured. Translations continued, debates persisted, and the Abbasid Golden Age remained vibrant for generations. Yet in many ways, Al-Mamun's reign is remembered as a high point, a moment when political authority and intellectual curiosity aligned, however briefly, to foster one of history's great flowerings of knowledge. Reflecting on his legacy, it is striking how his contradictions became part of his influence. His enforcement of the mina left wounds within the scholarly community, yet also underscored the seriousness with which he regarded intellectual positions. His campaign sought territorial gains, but they also brought back texts and ideas. His reign was not one of perfect harmony, but of restless striving for unity, for understanding, and for a vision of the world both earthly and celestial. For us, more than 1,000 years later, his name evokes images of candlelit rooms filled with manuscripts, of scholars crossing deserts to measure the earth, of nights spent watching stars from observatories. These are the images that endure more than the political struggles or the transient victories of war. Al-Ma'mun became not only a ruler of his people, but a symbol of curiosity itself. A reminder that power could be used to open doors to knowledge, and that the legacy of learning often outlasts the structures of empire. And so his biography rests within the great narrative of the Abbasid Golden Age, a man whose mind reached toward the stars while his authorities struggled with the earth, whose ambitions left contradictions, yet also treasures, whose reign whispers still in the turning pages of old books. When we think of the Abbasid Golden Age, we often picture libraries, ink-stained manuscripts, and debates carried out in the cool shade of Baghdad's halls. Yet alongside this world of translation and scholarship was another thread of curiosity, the Abbasids' fascination with the deep past, with monuments and ruins left behind by civilizations that had vanished long before their time. In this fascination lies a softer, more mysterious note in their history, an attempt not only to preserve the wisdom of the ancients, but to unearth their secrets, even when those secrets were written in stone. Imagine yourself walking through Baghdad during the reign of the Abbasids. Beyond the noise of markets and the whispers of study circles, you would occasionally hear tales of expeditions, of caliphs sending men to examine ruins scattered across the Middle East. These ruins were the silent bones of earlier empires, Assyrian palaces buried under mounds, Persian fire temples lying abandoned, and Egyptian pyramids standing tall against the desert horizon. The Abbasids lived close to these remnants, and like us, they could not help but wonder who built them and what knowledge might still be hidden inside. Among the most evocative stories is that of Caliph Al-Ma'mun and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid, already thousands of years old in its time, loomed over the desert as a mystery of stone. Al-Ma'mun, with his restless curiosity, is said to have ordered an expedition to open it. His men carved their way into the ancient structure, entering passages that had lain sealed for centuries. What they expected to find, treasure, hidden texts, or evidence of forgotten knowledge, we may never know for certain. Accounts differ, and the reality is cloaked in both legend and exaggeration. Some chroniclers suggest that the expedition uncovered chambers with inscriptions and fragments, though no great treasure. Others simply remark that the pyramid was forced open, leaving behind the robber's tunnel that visitors can still see today. Yet, whether or not the Abbasids truly uncovered anything significant, the act itself tells us much about their spirit. Here was a caliph who had already built observatories, gathered books, and redrawn the map of the world. For him, even the pyramids were a puzzle worth attempting to solve. We might pause to reflect on this image. Torches flickering against limestone walls, the air thick with dust, workers straining with tools as scholars look on. The echo of chisels carried through narrow stone corridors while the desert sun blazed outside. It was not only a search for wealth. It was a symbolic act, a reaching into the depths of human time to glimpse forgotten ages. To the Abbasids, the monuments of Egypt and Mesopotamia were like half-closed books waiting to be read. This curiosity extended beyond Egypt. The Abbasid world was dotted with ruins, and many caliphs took interest in cataloging them. Scholars preserved stories of Babylon and Nineveh, of the Hanging Gardens and lost temples. Sometimes they wove these into their own histories, mixing what they observed with inherited legends. In their writings, ruins became spaces of reflection, signs of the grandeur of past empires, and reminders of fragility of all human power. A caliph could look upon the shattered columns of Persepolis and imagine not only the wealth that once filled the halls, but also the inevitability of decline. One particularly intriguing figure in this sphere was Al-Ma'mun's contemporary, the scholar Al-Kindi. Known as a philosopher of the Arabs, Al-Kindi not only translated Aristotle, but also speculated about the origins of ancient monuments. He and others saw in these ruins a connection between mathematics, astronomy, and divine design. To them, Structures like the pyramids were not merely tombs but instruments of knowledge, aligned with stars, shaped by geometry, infused with symbolism. Whether or not these interpretations were accurate mattered less than the sense of wonder they inspired. We can imagine evenings in Baghdad when such stories were shared aloud. A circle of listeners gathered in the courtyard, oil lamps casting a warm glow, as a traveler or scholar recounted what it had seen in far-off lands. The descriptions would be vivid. Stone blocks so vast that no man could imagine moving them. Inscriptions and scripts no one could yet decipher. Temples eroded but still holding the memory of ritual. Listeners leaned back, perhaps half skeptical, half entranced, their minds drifting between reality and myth. In this way, archaeology for the Abbasids was not what we would recognize today as science. It was a mixture of exploration, folklore, and philosophical speculation, yet in its own quiet way. It was a kind of archaeology of the imagination, an effort to place their own age within the broader story of human civilization. For people who believed the world to be filled with divine signs, ruins were not only remnants of the past, but also reminders of lessons intended for the present. Al-Ma'mun's pyramid expedition may be the most famous episode, but it was part of a broader pattern. From Baghdad to Cairo, from Mesopotamia to Levant, the Abbasids lived amid monuments older than memory. Their curiosity about these monuments did not always lead to discoveries we would recognize as scientific. Yet it enriched their worldview and shaped their sense of identity. They were heirs not only to Islam and the Arab conquest, but also, in their own minds, to the legacies of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. For us, the mystery lies not only in what they may have found, but in what they imagined they might find. Did they hope for hidden books that could unlock cosmic secrets? Did they expect chambers filled with mechanical devices or long-lost metals? Or did they simply wish to affirm that nothing lay hidden from the gaze of the Abbasid caliphs? The questions remain unanswered, just as the pyramid itself continues to guard its ancient silence. And so, as we reflect on this part of their history, we enter a landscape of mystery. Flickering torches in tunnels, half-buried ruins on the horizon, whispered stories exchanged in Baghdad's courtyards. The Abbasid Golden Age was not only an era of logic and scholarship, it was also an age of wonder, when ruins stirred imagination and ancient stones seemed to speak in riddles. If the Abbasids were curious about the stones of ancient pyramids and the ruins of forgotten cities, they were equally drawn to mysteries that could not be touched with the hand. These were the invisible sciences, alchemy, astrology, and the study of hidden forces. To a modern ear, such pursuits may sound like superstition. Yet in the Abbasid imagination, they were part of the same grand search for knowledge. The Abbasids did not divide the world into science and mysticism in the way we might. For them, the cosmos was a single woven fabric, and every thread, whether material or unseen, could be studied. Imagine, if you will, the setting of an Abbasid scholar's workshop. The air faintly scented with burning oil, shelves lined with glass vessels and copper instruments, papers filled with symbols and numbers. Here, a man leans over a small furnace, carefully heating a mixture of powders. The flame glows softly, the bubbling liquid reflects the light, and notes are taken in precise handwriting. To him, this is not idle play. It is a continuation of a tradition believed to reach back to Hermes Trismegistus, to Egypt, and perhaps even to the builders of the great monuments themselves. Alchemy, to the Abbasids, was not merely about making gold. It was a broader quest to understand transformation. If metals could change their nature, might not the soul also ascend, refining itself just as lead was thought to become silver? This blending of spiritual metaphor and experimental practice gave alchemy a dual power. It satisfied both the philosophical hunger for meaning and the practical desire for discovery. The alchemist stood at the threshold of mystery, half scholar, half seeker. Names like Jabir ibn Hayyan echo through this period, wrapped in both legend and history. Jabir's writings, many of which circulated under his name for centuries, describe experiments with acids, distillation, and crystallization. Whether every work attributed to him was truly his own matters lessen the fact that the Abbasid world saw him as a master of hidden knowledge. His books were copied, studied, and pondered by generations. By candlelight, a reader might linger over his descriptions of substances, believing that within these cryptic texts lay the key to unlocking nature's secrets. Astrology, too, occupied a special place in Abbasid curiosity. While today it may be dismissed as mere fortune-telling, in the 9th century it was considered a sophisticated branch of mathematics and astronomy. The stars, so distant and yet so constant, were believed to influence the tides of earthly life. Caliphs themselves consulted astrologers before making important decisions. A campaign might be delayed until the stars were favorable. A coronation might be aligned with a particular conjunction of planets. To the Abbasids, the heavens were not only a map of the skies, but also a mirror of destiny. We can picture the astrologer at work. A quiet chamber, an open window revealing the night sky, parchment filled with circles and intersecting lines. He traces the positions of Saturn and Jupiter, noting their relation to Mars, writing calculations in careful script. Outside, the hum of Baghdad streets begins to fade as night deepens. But within, the scholar's eyes remain fixed on the alignment of stars. In his calculations, Ruler saw a hidden order that linked the fate of empires with the rhythm of the cosmos. The Abbasids also inherited and extended the lore of talismans and magical texts. Collections of writings attributed to ancient sages spoke of hidden formulas, charms that could heal, inscriptions that could protect, symbols that could ward away misfortune. Some were drawn from Greek sources, others from Persian and Indian traditions, woven together in the multicultural fabric of Baghdad. Though such works may not meet our modern standards of science, they reveal the depth of Abbasid curiosity, a willingness to explore every corner of knowledge, even those lie on the border between the natural and the supernatural. In these pursuits, one senses a gentle continuity with a fascination for ruins. Just as the Abbasids gaze upon pyramids and imagine secret chambers, so too do they gaze at the heavens or at an alchemical flame and imagine hidden truths waiting to be revealed. Knowledge, for them, was not limited to the immediately visible. It could be encoded in symbols, concealed in stars, or locked in substances that only yielded their secrets through careful transformation. At times, such pursuits drew criticism. Religious scholars cautioned against excessive reliance on astrology, reminding their audiences that destiny ultimately lay with God alone. And yet, even critics admitted that mathematics and astronomy, sciences underpinning astrology, were valuable for navigation, prayer times, and calendar making. Similarly, alchemical experiments, even when they failed to produce gold, often led to advances in practical chemistry. The tension between skepticism and curiosity gave these fields their peculiar status, half respected, half doubted, yet always compelling. Consider, too, the social atmosphere surrounding these mysterious sciences. They were not confined to laboratories or observatories. Stories of astrologers, alchemists, and hidden texts passed into literature and poetry. A merchant in a bazaar might gossip about a man who had supposedly turned copper into gold. A poet might compare the beloved's beauty to a star whose conjunction foretells good fortune. In whispered conversations, people shared tales of secret books buried under the sands, waiting for a lucky finder. The boundary between scholarly pursuit and popular imagination was porous. This blending of scholarship and folklore is what makes the Abbasid fascination with hidden sciences so distinctive. It was not only about technical knowledge, it was about wonder. To gaze at ruins, to heat a mysterious substance, to chart the planets, these were all ways of entering into the mystery of existence. In such acts, one sensed that the universe was alive with meaning, waiting to be read like a manuscript. The Abbasids believed themselves heirs to this manuscript, tasked with deciphering its script. As you picture this world, let your mind drift toward the rhythm of their curiosity. A caliph consulting his astrologer before a battle. A lone alchemist watching liquid shift color in a lamplit room. A group of scholars copying Jabir's texts late into the night. The scratching of pens blending with the flicker of candles. These scenes are soft, repetitive, and almost meditative. They remind us that knowledge, in the Abbasid imagination, was not only a pursuit of utility, but also a form of devotion, an act of wonder that stretched across centuries. As we linger a little longer among the Abbasid mysteries, we find ourselves drawn into another dimension of their intellectual life, the realm of dreams, of secret books, and of mystical philosophies that blur the lines between the visible and invisible. Just as the ruins of pyramids spoke of forgotten ages, and just as the stars whispered hidden patterns, so too did dreams and symbols seem to carry truths that lay beyond ordinary speech. In the Abbasid world, dream interpretation held a place of honor. The Quran itself tells of the dreams of Joseph, and the early caliphs remembered this as a sign of divine wisdom. Manuals of dream interpretation circulated widely, filled with lists of images and their meanings. To dream of water might suggest life or knowledge. To dream of birds could foretell travel. The caliphs themselves sometimes sought guidance from interpreters, treating dreams as messages that connected the sleeping soul with a larger, unseen order. Imagine yourself in the quiet of a Baghdad evening. A caliph describes his dream to a learned scholar. A tree that blossoms in winter, a river flowing backward. The scholar listens calmly, pauses, and then explains that these signs speak of reversal, of change, of hidden fortune. The chamber is still, the lamps glow gently, and the hush of expectation surrounds the words. Beyond dreams, there was also the fascination with secret texts. Stories circulated of books hidden deep within ruins, manuscripts buried in clay jars, or scrolls left by ancient kings. These tales were not only legends, they reflected a real appetite for the discovery of forgotten wisdom. Just as Greek and Persian texts were translated and studied in Baghdad, so too did people imagine that other, older books might one day surface, carrying secrets of medicine, astronomy, or even immortality. Sometimes, these tales found their way into literature. A character in a story might stumble upon a book that revealed the language of birds, or a talisman that gave command over the wind. To the Abbasid imagination, the possibility of hidden knowledge was never entirely closed. Mystical philosophy also flourished in this atmosphere of wonder. Thinkers influenced by both Greek philosophy and Islamic spirituality sought to understand the soul's place in the cosmos. Some wrote of emanations of light, of a universe unfolding from a single source. Others spoke of the soul's journey upward, a path of refinement that echoed the alchemist's furnace. The Sufi tradition, which was finding its voice in this era, added yet another layer. For the Sufi, the mysteries were not in books or stars alone, but in the heart's direct experience of the divine. A candle flickering in the night might be seen as a reminder of the soul's yearning, the flame reaching upward as if toward its origin. These philosophies were not only confined to dusty texts. They found their way into poetry, where metaphor became a vessel for mystery. The beloved's glance was compared to a talisman, the curve of the moon to a hidden script in the heavens, the intoxication of wine to the lifting of the soul beyond ordinary perception. Even for those who never read a philosophical treatise, the echoes of mystery colored their imagination through verse, stories, and songs. One may imagine sitting in a Baghdad courtyard as the night deepens, listening to a storyteller. The air is warm, the stars faintly visible beyond the lanterns, and the tale unfolds slowly. A prince who dreams of a golden key, a traveler who finds a secret city beneath the desert, a wise man who deciphers symbols on a hidden wall. The listeners lean back, half attentive, half drifting into reverie. For them, these stories are not mere entertainment. They are a way of touching the mysterious, a reminder that the world is wider and stranger than what the eye sees. Even in the scholarly atmosphere of the House of Wisdom, one senses this blending of the real and the imagined. A translator might work with a Greek text on astronomy by day, yet in the evening hear tales of magical books by night. The boundaries between rational inquiry and symbolic speculation were porous, allowing curiosity to flow freely across them. To be an Abbasid scholar was not only to measure, calculate, and record, but also to wonder, to interpret, and to dream. It is worth noting that these pursuits, while mysterious, were not aimless. Dream interpretation could influence real decisions. Mystical philosophy shaped the moral and spiritual outlook of communities. Tales of hidden books encourage the preservation and study of texts, ensuring that knowledge, whether legendary or authentic, remained valued, even when legends exaggerated. They created a cultural environment in which discovery was celebrated. And so, when we look back at the Abbasid fascination with mystery, we see not superstition alone, but a broader pattern of seeking. They sought wisdom in ruins, in stars, in fire and metals, in talismans, in dreams, and in poetry. Each of these was a doorway into the unknown. Each revealed, in its own way, the desire to understand the order behind appearances. As you let these images drift in your mind, the dream interpreter listening carefully in a lamplit chamber, the seeker unearthing a manuscript in the desert sands, the poet comparing love to the light of hidden stars, you may feel a rhythm emerging. It is the same rhythm that guided the Abbasids in their age of discovery. A slow, patient willingness to peer into the shadows, to turn over stones, to read signs, to wonder at mysteries without fully resolving them. It is a rhythm both soothing and enduring, reminding us that curiosity itself can be a form of rest. When we think of the Abbasid Golden Age, it is easy to picture only the glittering palaces, the great libraries, and the magnificent mosques. And indeed, those existed, symbols of power, wealth, and refinement. But beneath and alongside them were countless quieter lives. Merchants, bakers, scribes, porters, servants, and families whose days unfolded in simple rhythms of work, rest, and worship. The contrast between these two worlds, the lofty and the ordinary, offers yet another way to enter into the atmosphere of this remarkable age. Imagine, for a moment, the interior of a caliphate palace in Baghdad. The floors gleam with polished marble, cool beneath the feet. Carpets from distant Persia and Central Asia soften the chambers with woven gardens of red, blue, and gold. Bronze lamps hang from arches, casting steady light on walls decorated with calligraphy and geometric patterns. Musicians in silk garments play gentle melodies, filling the air with the plucking of strings and the soft murmur of flutes. Courtiers speak in low voices, each careful of words, each aware that proximity to the caliph is both a privilege and a danger. Here, time seems measured not in hours, but in audiences, ceremonies, and the delicate performance of etiquette. Now, shift your imagination to a different setting. A small home along a narrow street in the city. The walls are of sun-baked brick. The air carries the scent of bread rising in clay ovens and of spices from nearby stalls. Children's voices mingle with the calls of vendors, and the tread of donkeys echoes on the cobblestones. Inside, the furnishings are plain. A few mats, simple bowls of pottery, perhaps a small wooden chest to hold garments. A family gathers for a meal of bread, lentils, and perhaps a little cheese. The simplicity of this life is not lacking in richness of its own. It holds a steady comfort routine, the bonds of kinship, and the quiet rhythm of prayer marking the day. The Abbasid elite lived with luxuries unimaginable to many. They wore silks embroidered with gold thread, imported perfumes of musk and amber, and jewels carried along caravan routes from India and beyond. Servants attended to their every need, arranging clothing, preparing elaborate meals, and carrying messages between chambers. Banquets might include roasted meats, delicately spiced rice dishes, and sweets of honey and almonds. Wine, though debated and often forbidden, was not unknown among the upper circles, especially in private gatherings. Poets were invited to recite verses at these feasts, and their words became part of the entertainment, polished like jewels to reflect both wit and beauty. By contrast, the common people enjoyed simpler pleasures. A market day brought bustle and variety, dates, figs, nuts, onions, and olives often on wooden trays. A small sweet of sesame and honey might be a rare treat, shared among children. Entertainment might be found in listening to a storyteller on a street corner or watching jugglers in a public square. Religious festivals added another rhythm to the year. Processions, lanterns, recitations, and communal meals that blended joy with devotion. While lacking the polish of palace ceremonies, these gatherings carried warmth and inclusion, a sense that even those without wealth could participate in something greater than themselves. The distinction between elite and ordinary was visible not only in food, clothing, and entertainment, but also in space. The caliphs and high officials resided in palaces surrounded by gardens, where water flowed through carved channels, and the air was cooled by fountains. Their compounds were guarded, their gates imposing, their privacy maintained with layers of attendants. Meanwhile, most families lived in modest dwellings that opened directly onto crowded lanes, where privacy was rare and community life constant. Children played in the streets, women exchanged news from doorways, and the sound of prayer drifted from small neighborhood mosques. And yet, despite these differences, a thread of connection bound the two worlds. The same call to prayer reached both the palace and the alleyway. The same stories of prophets and poets were told to children in both grand and humble settings. Even the foods, though varied in richness, often shared common roots. Bread, rice, lentils, and dates sustained both ruler and porter alike. This intertwining of shared culture with stark differences in wealth created a society at once unified and layered, a city that contained multitudes. If you pause for a moment, you may sense how the rhythm of elite life differed from that of the common people. The palace was filled with ceremony, with the weight of politics, with an air of performance that demanded constant attention. The alleyway, by contrast, was filled with the smaller concerns of daily survival, of making ends meet, of finding joy in modest gatherings. And yet, both rhythms together formed the pulse of Abbasid Baghdad, the grand and the ordinary, the glittering and the humble, each reflecting the other, each shaping the texture of the age. To reflect on these contrasts is to remember that history is not only the story of kings and scholars, but also of bakers, mothers, apprentices, and children. The caliph might sponsor a scholar, but the bread baked in an alley oven sustained the scholar's study. The poetry recited in a banquet hall might sing of love, but love itself was lived in countless modest homes across the city. It is in holding both together that we glimpse the full breadth of Abbasid life. And so, in this moment of reflection, imagine yourself walking slowly through Baghdad. You pass the tall gates of a palace, guarded and silent. Then, only a few streets away, you find yourself in a busy marketplace, alive with voices, laughter, bargaining, and scent. The transition is immediate, yet natural. The elite and the ordinary share the same city, breathe the same air, and live beneath the same sky. And this coexistence, this mingling of the splendid with the simple, was one of the quiet wonders of the Abbasid world. Among the many features of the Abbasid Golden Age, education and learning stood as pillars of identity and pride. The Abbasid court projected itself as the guardian of knowledge, the protector of scholars, and the patron of wisdom both ancient and newly discovered. Yet, the experience of learning was not the same for all. There were profound contrasts between the scholarly opportunities available to the elite and the modest encounters with learning accessible to the common people. Together, they formed a spectrum that defined intellectual life in Baghdad. Imagine yourself walking toward the House of Wisdom, that famed library and research institution. The building rises with graceful arches. Its doors open to scholars from across the empire. Inside, there are rows of manuscripts, written in careful Arabic script on parchment and paper. Scholars sit on cushions, reciting aloud as they copy, translate, and comment upon texts. The hum of voices creates a steady rhythm, punctuated by the scratching of pens and the soft rustle of pages. To be admitted to this circle was a privilege, usually reserved for those with connections to the Caliph, to wealthy patrons, or to the elite scholarly families who formed Baghdad's intellectual core. Here, sons of noble households might study alongside translators from distant lands. They learned mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. They debated Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen, weaving these teachings into the fabric of Islamic thought. Some rose to prominence, their names remembered centuries later. For them, education was both a path to prestige and a form of service to the court. To write a respected commentary, to design an astronomical instrument, or to cure an illness within the palace walls could mean advancement, wealth, and reputation. But what of the common people, those whose names did not enter the manuscripts of history? Their lives, too, were touched by learning, though in more modest ways. In small neighborhood mosques, children gathered to learn the Quran, repeating verses until the words flowed smoothly from their lips. Literacy, though not universal, was valued, and many parents sought at least the rudiments of reading for their children. A shopkeeper might keep accounts in neat rows of figures. A scribe could be hired in the market to write a letter for someone who could not hold a pen. A traveling preacher might share stories not only of scripture, but also of history, weaving education into entertainment and devotion alike. The distinction between elite and ordinary learning was sharp, yet porous. Sometimes, a talented student from humble origins caught the attention of a patron. A young man with a quick memory and skill in recitation might be supported through studies, rising from the alleys to the courts of scholars. These stories, though rare, offered glimmers of social mobility, where intellect could lift a person beyond the boundaries of birth. Yet, for most, the rhythms of daily survival left little time for deep study. Knowledge reached them instead in fragments, in a proverb repeated, a verse recited, a medical remedy passed down, or a prayer whispered at dusk. Education for the elite also came with burdens. To belong to scholarly circles meant endless debates, long nights of reading by lamplight, and the pressure of patronage. A mistake in translation, an argument poorly made, or a treatise that displeased the caliph could end a career or even a life. The common people, though excluded from these lofty circles, carried none of these dangers. Their knowledge was lived, immediate, and practical. They knew how to mend a shoe, how to bake bread without waste, how to navigate the noisy market, or how to care for children with home remedies. In this way, their wisdom formed the quiet foundation of the city's life, as essential as the dazzling brilliance of scholarly debate. One might picture a scholar bent over a manuscript, tracing a line of Greek philosophy into Arabic script, his lamp flickering late into the night. Nearby, but unseen, a baker tends his oven, the glow of coals lighting his face as he prepares bread for the morning. Both are awake, both engaged in their craft, both essential to the city's survival. The scholar preserves knowledge across centuries. The baker preserved the household through nourishment. Side by side, though worlds apart, they embody the contrast of the Abbasid age. The atmosphere of Baghdad was charged with curiosity, yet also layered with divisions. The wealthy elite discussed the movement of the stars, while common folk looked up at the same sky for guidance in travel or prayer. Physicians debated the humors of the body, while ordinary families relied on herbs and traditional remedies passed from mother to daughter. Each world had its wisdom, and though one was written into history books and the other often forgotten, both shaped the lived experience of time. And so, education during the Abbasid Golden Age was not only the story of grand libraries and celebrated scholars, it was also the story of countless small acts of learning, scattered across kitchens, workshops, and prayer halls. Together, they formed a city where knowledge flowed in many streams, some swift and dazzling, others slow and quiet, but all feeding into the great river of civilization that the Abbasids came to symbolize. Pause for a moment to imagine the feeling of parchment beneath the hand, the steady rhythm of recitation, and the faint scent of ink mixing with the glow of an oil lamp. Then shift your vision to a small school in a narrow alley, where children recite verses aloud, their voices rising in unison, the lessons etched into memory by repetition. Both scenes are real, both are true, and both remind us that history is not only made in palaces, but also in humble homes and voices carried on the evening air. Festivals and rituals in Abbasid Baghdad were more than mere diversions. They reflected the structure of society, the rhythms of the calendar, and the subtle distinctions between elite splendor and everyday joy. They were moments when the city, usually divided by rank and wealth, seemed to move in harmony, even as differences quietly persisted. Imagine the wide streets of Baghdad on a festival day. Lanterns and banners hang from wooden beams, casting color into the dusty air. The scent of roasted lamb and sweet confections drifts from market stalls. Families gather in groups, children darting between stalls with wooden toys or sticky hands from honey pastries. It is a time of joy, but the form it takes varies greatly depending on who you are and where you find yourself within the city's social fabric. For the elites, festivals often meant carefully arranged gatherings within palaces or the courtyards of great mansions. There might be music played by skilled musicians, their lutes and flutes weaving melodies that floated into the night. Guests reclined on soft cushions, sipping sherbet cooled with snow transported from distant mountains. Poets performed verses of praise or satire, their words refined, their delivery measured. For them, celebration was as much about display as about delight. Every gesture reinforced hierarchy, each garment or dish a silent message of prestige and refinement. The common people experienced festivals differently, yet no less vividly. In the crowded quarters of the city, music spilled into the streets, but it was the beat of drums and the laughter of neighbors. Markets became stages with jugglers, storytellers, and acrobats drawing eager crowds. Children squealed at the sight of a trained monkey leaping through hoops or at the clatter of dice in games of chance. Women prepared extra food, filling homes with the aromas of spice and bread. Celebrations here were humble, yet they carried the same essential joy, the chance to set aside burdens, if only for a day. Religious rituals formed the heartbeat of this shared life. The call to prayer punctuated every day, and during festivals such as Eid, the entire city seemed to breathe as one. The wealthy might sacrifice fine animals, distributing meat generously, while the poor gathered gladly to receive their share. In the mosque courtyards, men and women alike listened to sermons reminding them of virtue, community, and humility before God. In these moments, distinctions blurred slightly. The rich stood beside the poor, the noble beside the laborer, each bowing in unison, each repeating words that bound them together. Yet even in shared rituals, differences lingered. The elite might employ scholars to craft eloquent prayers or poets to embellish sacred themes, while the poor relied on oral tradition and simple recitation. The wealthy decorated their homes with lamps, while the poor relied on a single flickering flame. But both gazed upward to the same stars as the festival night deepened, and both sought comfort in the rhythm of familiar customs. Music was central to both worlds. In palaces, refined melodies played on oud and cannon accompanied carefully choreographed gatherings. At street level, drums clapping and voice created a more spontaneous rhythm. A child might fall asleep on his mother's shoulder to the steady beat of a drum, just as a courtier might close his eyes to the flowing notes of a professional musician. In different forms, The music lulled, soothed, and carried people into a space beyond the worries of daily life. There were also spectacles designed to display power. The Caliph's processions, for example, revealed grandeur to awe the people. Imagine the Caliph riding beneath a parasol of silk, guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor, followed by camels laden with treasures. The crowds pressed in, craning their necks for a glimpse, murmuring blessings and marveling at the wealth. For ordinary citizens, such events were stories to retell for weeks. For the elite, they were reminders of privilege and position. Both groups participated, though from vastly different vantage points. At times, the boundaries softened. A wealthy patron might sponsor public entertainment, allowing ordinary people to enjoy music, food, or games at his expense. These acts of generosity reinforced social bonds, ensuring loyalty and admiration. The common people, in turn, brought their vitality, filling the streets with cheer, their voices rising in laughter or song. But festivals were not always joyous. The changing of the seasons brought uncertainty, and rituals were often bound to hopes for rain, for harvest, or for relief from illness. A family might tie a prayer to a tree or recite words for protection against misfortune. Elite households did the same, though with greater ceremony, inviting scholars to oversee rituals or preparing elaborate feasts in gratitude for answered prayers. Beneath the surface, both elite and ordinary lives were bound by the same hopes and fears, seeking safety in tradition. Picture, then, a festival evening. In one quarter, a grand banquet hall glows with lamplight, the hum of polite conversation weaving through music and poetry. Servants glide quietly, offering trays of delicacies. In another part of the city, children chase one another through alleyways, lanterns swinging in their hands, their laughter rising above the beat of a street drum. The two worlds are different, yet they exist side by side, their rhythms overlapping in the same city air. The contrast of Abbasid festivals remind us that joy is universal, though expressed in countless ways. The elite displayed wealth and refinement. The common people embraced vitality and togetherness. Both carried traditions forward, shaping a city where celebration became a bridge across divisions, even if the bridge was narrow and fragile. And as the night grew late, as lamps dimmed and voices quieted, both palace and alley returned to silence, the city resting until the rhythm of daily life resumed once more. And so, our long and gentle walk through the Abbasid Golden Age draws to a close. We have drifted through its marketplaces, wandered into its homes, traced the footsteps of its caliphs, and paused beside its festivals. We have listened to the hum of scholars in libraries, the quiet laughter of children in alleys, the measured tones of poets in palace halls. Together, these fragments have formed a picture of a world that once thrived along the banks of the Tigris, a city whose rhythms and discoveries echoed across continents. If you are still awake, you may notice how distant that world seems, and yet how strangely familiar. The desire to gather, to celebrate, to share food, to seek wisdom. These are not bound by centuries or borders. They are the rhythms of being human, the steady pulse of life that continues in every time and place. And if your eyes are already heavy, then perhaps you are drifting now, floating between the Abbasid past and the present moment. The city of Baghdad in its golden age becomes like a dream, winding streets fading into mist, the glow of lanterns dimming into shadow, the murmur of prayers and music fading into silence. What remains is only a gentle awareness that people lived, loved, studied, worked, and rested just as we do now. History, when told softly, is less about dates and battles, and more about the quiet textures of life. The sound of sandals on a stone street, the scent of bread rising in an oven, the coolness of water drawn from a clay jar, the hush of a scholar turning a page in a manuscript. These are the small, ordinary moments that carried people through their days, unnoticed at the time but enduring in memory. Tonight, as you rest, You can imagine yourself carried along with them, a quiet observer in their world. You are seated in a courtyard as a warm evening breeze stirs the air. A lamp flickers nearby. The voices around you soften until they are little more than a hum. Somewhere in the distance, a lute is played, its notes drifting on the night air. And above, the same stars they once gazed upon shine still, timeless and steady. If you have found peace in this wandering, I invite you to carry that stillness with you. Let your breathing slow, let your mind settle, and let the rhythm of the past guide you into rest. And if this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like this video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Leave a comment, if you wish, to share where you are listening from and what time it is there. It is comforting to imagine others, scattered across the world, listening to the same stories, gently falling asleep to the same slow unfolding of history. Now the story quiets, the voices fade, the lights dim, the Abbasid city drifts back into the mist of time. All that remains is the calm of the present moment, the comfort of your own space, and the steady rhythm of your breath. May you rest well, may you sleep deeply, and may history in all its quiet echoes keep you company until morning comes.